Good morning and welcome to What's Happening SBC. My name is Randall Palmer and with me today is Dale Ward, the Executive Director for the Shreveport Water Works Museum. Thanks for being with us, Dale.
Glad to be here.
Welcome to the show. So first of all, for those who have no idea what we're talking about, what is the Shreveport Water Works Museum?
Well, the Shreveport Water Works Museum is located at the historic McNeil Street pumping station near downtown Shreveport, and it is the city of Shreveport's very first municipal water plant. It was constructed and opened for business in 1887, so it's been around for a while.
So speaking of which, can you tell us about the history of the McNeil Street pumping station?
Oh, I'd be glad to. The history of the water plant is more meaningful if you start before there was a water plant and back up a little bit. The city of Shreveport did not have a public water supply until 1887. Which is interesting because the city of Shreveport was actually founded in 1839. New Orleans had its public water supplies put in 1835, but the city of Shreveport ran along from 1839 until 1887, almost 50 years, with no public water supply. And, you know, people needed water just as much back then as they do nowadays, so what did they do? Well, most people in the city of Shreveport captured rainwater off their roofs into big wooden tubs, cisterns, and used that for their domestic water supply. A few people had wells. Wells were poor quality. Some people that could afford it bought spring water from springs just south of Shreveport, downtown Shreveport. Spring Street is named that for a reason. And that was the solution for well-to-do people, so they didn't have to use that water off their roof. But finally, in 1886, the city had a bidding contest, and the low bidder, the company that promised the lowest water rates, got a contract from the city, a franchise, to furnish the city's water and sewer. If you've got running water, you can have a sewer system too. Well, what took so long? I mean, 1839, 1887, what's going on here? What was going on was that the city just didn't place much priority on it. You know, the folks that paid the property taxes that would have paid for the water plant, mostly, used spring water. That was a cheaper solution for them. But finally, in the 1880s, there were a series of bad fires in the Shreveport area, in the commercial area of Shreveport, that really caused the city to get pressure from property owners to do something. Their insurance rates were going out the roof, and so the city got the McNeil Street pumping station constructed and opened in 1887. So the real driving force behind it wasn't sanitation the way we would think nowadays, but fighting fires, fighting fires. But by 1887, running water, indoor plumbing were well-known modern conveniences, and Shreveporters wanted them. So when the waterworks came to town, they lined up down at the office and asked to be connected and began to get their water delivered the modern way, pressurized water through a pipe. So that's how the pumping station came to be where it is now, and at the time it was. But picking up the story from 1887, it does not end there. The history of the waterworks goes on. The water plant that was put in 1887, remember, was designed principally for fighting fires. So the way the water was treated to begin with was to be pumped in from Cross Bow, which was right out in front of the building, not Red River, but from Cross Bow, it went into a settling basin behind the building, kind of like a big swimming pool, and was allowed to sit, and what settled to the bottom did, and what didn't, and then the clean water was pumped off the top out to the city's customers. Well, you know, that's fine for a fire hydrant, but if you're a housewife running water into your kitchen sink to wash the dishes with, no good. So the complaints started pretty quickly after the waterworks opened for business, and then the water company began to come under pressure from its customers about the muddy water. And finally, well, it pretty quickly reached a point of customers saying, you got to get rid of this muddy water or I'm not paying my water bill anymore. So the water company had to do something, and what they did, just when the water plant was just 3 years old, was install filtration, sand filters that were used to run the water from the settling basins through and then out. Now these sand filters were just like the name described, kind of like sand filters in a modern swimming pool water treatment system. And they did a good job. The water leaving the water plant wasn't muddy anymore, and the complaint stopped, at least for a while. And so that was in 1890, and in 1890, sand filtration was a new technology, an evolving technology. It had been used here and there, but in 1890, only 10% of the water plants in America, and all of America, filtered their water, and in all of the South, there were only 12 water plants. But Shreveport had cutting-edge, state-of-the-art sand filtration in 1890, so an early adopter of that technology. Well, the time passed, the 1890s began to roll by. The city was growing, partially due to the fact that it had a good, clean source of water nowadays, and by the late 1890s, Cross Bayou, the original source of raw water, was too little. There just wasn't enough water in Cross Bayou to serve the needs of the city. And in fact, in some years, in the summertime, when the stream was dry, the city was basically sucking all the water out of this bayou. It just wasn't enough. So the water company, the Shreveport Water Works Company that ran and owned the water works, began a desperate search for a new source of raw water. And that's important to remember, that the city water plant was privately owned. It was not owned by the city of Shreveport. It was owned privately and was in business to make a profit. Thus the sand filters and complaints from customers a few years earlier. So finally, in the late 1890s, the water company began looking for an alternative source of water. They tried using 12 Mile Bayou. 12 Mile Bayou wouldn't stay put. The Red River flooded regularly back then and would change courses, and on 2 occasions left the pumping station that they had installed on 12 Mile Bayou in the wrong place. So that didn't work out very well. And so finally, in 1900, the water plant, the privately owned water plant, installed a new pipeline to Red River and a pumping station that brought in water from Red River. Now, I said finally. Well, why was that finally? How come we weren't using Red River in the first place?
Right.
Shreveport was here because of the Red River. Well, back in that period of time, the Red River was not called red for nothing. It was pretty dirty, very silty. It was also salty. There were salt springs and salt deposits in the watershed in the tributary area up in Oklahoma and Texas that contaminated the flow with salt, and it tasted bad and just wasn't considered fit to drink. But by 1900, 1910, the water plant company was in desperate straits. You know, the complaints over the quality of the water had skyrocketed again, and so they were kind of forced to turn to Red River, which had plenty of water but poor quality water. So, but even after they turned to Red River, they would mix the river water with as much water from 12 Mile Bayou and Cross Bayou as they could to improve the quality. So that gets us to the 1910 period of time. Now, something else very important happened in 1900. Let's back up a little bit to 1900. Alum, A-L-U-M, had been invented and applied for treatment of water in water plants in different places in the country. And the Shreveport Water Works Company, once again, ever alert to improvements in technology, was an early adopter of alum treatment technology about 1900. Now, alum is an interesting chemical. The little molecules of alum, when they dissolve in water, are physically sticky, like masking tape or Velcro. And so the dirt particles that are suspended in the water that make it green and brown and other unappetizing colors will stick to that alum particle and make a little clump that gets heavy and settles to the bottom. So alum was added in 1900 and was a key improvement to the treatment of water here in Shreveport. Again, the Shreveport Water Works Company was an early adopter of this technology. So 1910, the water company began to use river water, and then in 1911, something else very important happened. Now, up to this point, I haven't mentioned germs. Contamination by bacteria was an important factor back then. Cholera and dysentery, particularly cholera, diphtheria, were all waterborne illnesses, and there were some terrible cholera epidemics after cholera came over from Europe in the mid-1800s. The population of Louisville was sickened, and about 25% of the population died in the mid-1840s, 1840 something. So there had been some terrible cholera epidemics through the 1800s, and so there was a concern about pathogens, germs in the water. The germ theory of disease was being developed by researchers, Louis Pasteur and others, and in 1911, the water plant here in Shreveport began to treat the water with chlorine to disinfect it. And interestingly, you'd think this seems like 1911, really? What took so long? Well, actually, the treatment of water with chlorine in America was begun in 1909 at a plant in New Jersey. And so the waterworks here in Shreveport, once again, was an early adopter of the latest technology in the world of water treatment in 1911, when they began to add chlorine to the treatment of the water plant. So the water plant had another big event in 1917. Okay, 1887, the water plant was constructed. The Shreveport Water Works Company and the owner, Samuel Bullock, were awarded a contract, the franchise. The franchise was good for 30 years. Okay, let's do the arithmetic on that. 1887, 1917 makes 30 years. So the franchise was up in 1917, but the city would not renew it. The city council had never really gotten along very well with the water company over the years. It was argue, argue, argue. The water's muddy, my rates are too high, the water pressure's too low, on and on. And so finally, in 1917, when the franchise expired, the city of Shreveport would not renew it, and under pressure, the Shreveport Water Works Company sold out their plant to the city of Shreveport, dissolved, and went out of business. So after 1917, the city's water plant was owned by the city of Shreveport. In 1917, the city not only bought the plant, but made a very fortunate decision when they hired a man named Thomas L. Amos, to be the superintendent of their newly acquired water plant. Amos had worked at the water plant back when it was a privately owned company and had moved on briefly for about a year, and the city hired him back. And Mr. Amos was a fixture on the Shreveport water scene, a very competent and highly skilled superintendent of the water plant until his retirement finally in 1962. So Tom Amos guided the Shreveport water plant through its early years and final years until the plant was retired. Now, something that happened again, one final bit of history, in 1980, from 1917 when the city got it to 1980, the city continued to operate the old steam pumping equipment at the water plant. You know, in the early days, I haven't mentioned this yet, but I'm about to big time. In the early days, if you wanted to pump water, you used steam engines. Now, this other stuff we've got nowadays, electricity, what have you, hadn't been developed yet and commercialized, So steam engines were the story at the water plant, and as the years went by, steam engines got obsolete and were replaced at other water plants in America, but here in Shreveport, that didn't happen. They continued to be run and used to pump the water. There were some good reasons for it. It wasn't like, we were just backwards or anything. There were some good reasons for it. And those steam engines were not finally retired until 1980, not that long ago.
Wow, that's that's a lot of history, but really fascinating. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more of What's Happening SBC.
When it comes to earning your degree, we know unexpected life events can wreak havoc on your success. If you're a student and find yourself in need, you're not alone. Bossier Parish Community College cares for you and wants to help. That's why we've launched the Cavalier Care Center. The Cavalier Care Center is your one-stop hub for programs like SNAP, Medicaid, free legal aid, help with tax credits, and more. Through a partnership with the Food Bank of North Louisiana, we have a USDA-approved emergency food pantry to address food insecurities among our students. And we offer a laptop loan program to help you during your time at BPCC. If you've got a job interview coming up, stop by the Career Closet and we'll get you dressed for success. Our #1 priority at Bossier Parish Community College is making sure our students get the best education possible, and the Cavalier Care Center is one more way we're helping to make sure that happens. For more information, visit us online at bpcc.edu or contact us today. We're ready to help you.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Dale Ward, Executive Director for the Shreveport Water Works Museum. I understand the museum's free to visit, Dale. Can you tell me how it's funded?
The museum is funded totally by donations. The city of Shreveport owns the property, and the museum has contracted with the city to operate the Shreveport Water Works Museum on site, and it's funded totally by donations.
Okay. And the Waterworks is listed as a National Historic Landmark. What is that?
The National Historic Landmark Program is overseen by the National Park Service out of Washington, D.C., and it recognizes property nationwide that is particularly distinctive in preserving and telling the story of the United States of America. There are nationwide around 2,500 landmarks like George Washington's Mount Vernon, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. Those are all National Historic Landmarks, and the McNeil Street Pumping Station is also recognized by the National Park Service as a National Historic Landmark. So it's in some pretty distinguished company.
Well, why is the Waterworks a landmark?
The Waterworks is a landmark for several reasons. One reason was the thing that helped get the attention of the National Park Service is that in 1980, I mentioned the steam engines were not finally retired until 1980. In 1980, when that happened, the Waterworks was the last operating steam-powered municipal water plant in America. So it went from the early 1900s, late 1800s, and pretty much everybody had a plant like this, to 1980, it was the last one. Not only was it an example of a steam-powered pumping station, it also was an early adopter through the years of technology advances in the treatment of water, and some of those technology advances, like the very first stand filters, are still on site. So the evaluation committee of the National Park Service came and looked at all of that and decided this place was worth keeping.
Cool. There's also a railroad museum on the property. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. The Waterworks Museum had some unoccupied buildings an unoccupied building out there that we weren't using for displays of waterworks related things, and so we contacted the Red River Valley Railroad Historical Society and discussed whether they would like to use that vacant space. We happened to know that the Railroad Society had been looking for a home for their equipment, to display their equipment for quite some time, and they were interested, and so about 5 years ago now, I guess, they came in and remodeled that building and moved in their memorabilia that they've got to display. We wish it was bigger. It's not as big as they would like or we would like, but it's there, and you can come out and see some examples of railroading right here in the Northwest Louisiana area out there too, as well as the waterworks.
They're doing renovations on that right now, like they're working
the
on.
Railroad Society has an HO gauge model train layout in their one end of their railroad museum building, and the original layout was donated by a member, and it was quite popular. I mean, sometimes one of our little pint-sized visitors would have to be dragged away crying before they got through looking at it. But wear and tear got the best of it, and it was just not possible to keep it going anymore. It was just worn out. And so the Railroad Society has removed that, and they are currently, as we speak, installing a new HO gauge model layout, custom made for their museum, that's going to replicate the downtown Shreveport area. It won't be a scale model, but it'll be a representation of downtown Shreveport with familiar landmarks like the First Methodist Church, the Union Station passenger depot before it burned, and some other things that residents of the city will recognize. So I think we ought to go out and have a look at that when it gets done.
Yeah, for sure. Well, who typically comes to the museum? Like, is it family
We really
friendly?
get a surprising cross-section of visitors, and not just locally, but actually from around the world. It's not unusual to have a visitor from overseas. You know, I could name off a laundry list of countries like China, Germany, Russia, you know, on and on. And we also get a pretty good cross-section of ages. When we opened the museum, I was a little worried that kids would be bored, but you know, if their parents brought them along. But actually, we found that it's a good family visit. The kids like it. They may not understand all the technology and history, but they love blowing the steam whistle, and they like looking in the big hole where the pump shaft is, and they like watching the big flywheel go around. So the kids enjoy it too, from about age 3 or 4 on up.
Mm-hmm. Do you give tours or walk around by yourself?
Our preferred modus operandi is to greet each family or group of people and give them a personal guided tour. Sometimes people prefer to walk themselves around. We give them a paper brochure that they can use to do that if they want to. We also have a cell phone tour that you can use to show yourself around if you want to. So we try to accommodate what is of interest to our visitors. But we definitely give tours. If you've got a group, a civic club or what have you, a Sunday school class, if you call ahead and let us know, we can arrange to accommodate a pretty good sized group if you want to bring a group for a tour of the museum as well.
And you also have events at the museum, right? Correct?
We do. We have a meeting room that's available. It's about 1,500 square feet. It can accommodate 100 odd people, 120 people if you wish to use it. The event room is modern. It's air conditioned and has carpet with running water and restrooms. And so it's available for that kind of thing, birthday parties, that sort of thing, if you want to use it. There is a nominal fee that we charge for that. And also, if you have an event, like in the evening, you've got a business group or something like that you'd like to bring out in the evening, say, you can rent the entire museum, use the meeting room, plus have your guests go through the historic area.
Cool. So what effect has COVID had on the museum?
COVID has been an unhappy situation for us, like it has been for a lot of locations. We've had about a third. Last year we had about a fourth to a third as many visitors as we would normally expect during the year. We were probably fortunate to get as many as we did. The museum itself, the historic area, is pretty COVID-proofed in a way because it's a large open building with high ceilings that's pretty effectively ventilated by Mother Nature. And so it's not a real hazardous place from a COVID standpoint, but we follow all the currently operative protocols about masking and what have you.
All right, so what are the hours of the museum?
The museum is open 6 days a week. It's open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. and it's open on Sunday afternoon from 12 noon until 4. You can come without an appointment, just come on out. If you do have a group that's a bit larger and might need more than one tour guide, you know, it'd be good to call ahead, but otherwise just come on out. It's free, there's no admission charge. We do appreciate donations though. As I mentioned, we fund what we do out there with donations.
Okay. Well, that's it for today's show. Dale, I want to thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time on What's Happening SBC.